Right. Hello. We should be live now. Um, let's just have a quick look. Right, I can see comments. Let me take a jumper. Right. Okay. We are good to go. Now, I'm gonna just post about this in Instagram, and I will be painting very, very presently. Um, Hi, Julian. Um, Glad to see you here. Uh, is it? Do I sound okay before I sort of get into anything? Am I sounding clear? And right, let's self portrait. Right, fantastic. Sounds good. Okay, amazing. Right, let's now share this, and I will get going. As always, sort of the woes of some technical troubles before getting into it, but alas, we are here now and ready to do some painting. So let me throw this on. Today I am going to be painting a self-portrait. Um, I don't really have any intentions of either finishing it or not. I'll sort of take it as far as I feel I can go in this session. Um, and yeah, we'll sort of see what that is. Um, I'll be using a limited palette. So the limited palette that I've sort of really been interested in at the moment is a palette of my own sort of fiddling around with things. And I've been doing most of my paintings with this palette over the last sort of month and a half. But it consists of titanium white. I generally use a Winsor and Newton Griffin Alkyd titanium white just because it has a faster drying ability, so it means that I can sort of work on paintings within days of each other. Um, and sort of other than that, it has a Indian yellow, a permanent orange, an intense pink, and a phthalocylene blue. That is a phthalocylene turquoise, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and I've sort of been consistently amazed at how much range this palette has, because it's definitely not uh, a sort of palette that I expected to have as much range as it did. I sort of tried it out, having a general experimentation within some painting, and yeah, I've just been sort of completely enamored with this palette. So um, I'll be using that. Um, Sort of, I can read chat, um, so I can sort of answer any questions. Um, and right, that is now posted to Instagram, so we are ready to go. Hello, Luca. Hello, Nuran. Um, Let me take off this plastic and get going. So, within this sort of palette that I've been experimenting with over the last few days, oh, sorry, over the last few weeks, I've really just tried to throw myself into a bunch of different scenarios with it to see how it sort of holds up. It's always my go-to interaction with palettes is to just sort of stress test them with real life painting scenarios. I've never been one for finding sort of color swatches very helpful, because I find them too limiting in sort of what they tell you about the palette. They generally tell you what the palette can reach, or sort of what necessarily you can lean towards with a palette in order to sort of lean into its positives. But in sort of real world scenarios, it doesn't translate too well, or at least I've never felt it translate too well. So I've always sort of wanted to just test palettes out with completing a bunch of different paintings. Within this palette, within sort of, I've been really experimenting with work over the last I don't know, maybe 2 months with this palette, and I've had again a lot of very interesting successes. Sorry, there's been some sort of oil leak into my white paint, so my white paint is now ever so slightly tinted pink. Which is what it is. Now I've just got slightly pink white paint. But no matter, we will endeavour to complete a painting even with such disastrous setbacks as a slightly bit of pink in my paint. But yeah, as you can see, sort of got this Griffin Alkyd white paint. Again, sort of titanium white is generally very expendable in my palette. I use it quite a lot, and I use it quite heavily, I guess. I particularly like the Griffin Alkyd white paint because it just allows me to sort of paint maybe the next day if I'm sort of controlling my surface and sort of allowing it to dry before I build up too much paint on the surface. But definitely within 24 hours or sort of 48 hours, I would really expect to be able to paint on top. We also have the Indian Yellow. Again, really interesting paint. Sort of got introduced to it over the summer by Hilary Butterworth. Before that, I'd never really used it too much. So it's definitely been a very big learning curve on that. Then we have Permanent Orange. And the Permanent Orange definitely sort of acts sort of as this palette's red. The Permanent Orange is definitely quite an interesting colour. If I'm not mistaken, it's the same sort of colour, or the same pigment as Winsor Orange by Winsor & Newton, which adds in a very pinkish manner. It sort of really allows itself to get into that sort of redder form of an orange. Very, very useful for when painting elements of reflected light and sort of elements of light that are warm, because it sort of is mimicking those palettes. How do I, using that much white, how do you battle mixing? With milkiness, sort of, it's quite interesting because I would say that I am choosing colors that are working more as tints rather than colors. So even when adding quite a bit of white to the paint, they still remain quite vibrant and quite strong in their sort of general hue, their general chroma. It's part of the reason that I avoid colors like ultramarine blue, because I think ultramarine blue is very, very quick to get very, very milky and pastely, and generally that isn't something that I want too often. There's definitely sort of scenarios in which that is helpful, but for the most place, I just want it to be sort of in my control with whether or not it's pastely or not. sort of uh, the general milkiness in paint, um, I think it becomes a question of more how do you control the sort of colourful chromatic greys that sort of come along with adding white to your paint in order to give you a sense of like global color. It's sort of the question that I think is more pertinent there. It sort of becomes a question of trying to balance the entire painting to sort of have this potential pastel-esque feeling of the adding white to the paint, or in the same sort of manner, that sort of milkiness to the paint. Um, just controlling the paint and the color across the entire surface so it doesn't stick out too much as potentially pastely. I'm just grabbing my reference image and then we'll off going. So interestingly, I've really been engaging with painting from my phone, specifically from my phone recently. When in the past I've sort of tried to experiment with a lot of different scenarios in which I could have different filming setups and sort of different setups, screens, and sort of just making things possible in order to sort of paint and see painting and be able to work around the sort of issues that streaming bring. And recently, I sort of mentioned it last week when I was streaming with Nick. I came across the fact that Nick paints from his phone. He uses his phone as his reference image, and it sort of really got me thinking about that, because Nick is a sort of artist that has the ability to make it so he has the sort of reference as he wants. So if he wanted it on a screen, he can have it on a screen. If he wanted it on his phone, he can have it on his phone. And he actively chooses to have the reference on his phone. And I sort of was quite interested in that, because I'd never really engaged with painting from my phone. But it's a completely different sort of scenario. I feel that you're very intimate with your phone in general. It's sort of able to be quite close to you and sort of have this reaction with the screen that you sort of can interact with it quite well, because you are so used to interacting with phone screens in general. And then as a result of that, you sort of can have quite an ease of access with looking at references and sort of examining what's happening. So if you haven't, I would really, really recommend trying to paint from your phone. Hello, Emily. Nice to see you here. Um, exactly. As well, sort of as Luca's saying, sort of the size of the phone is definitely really important in that manner. Sort of it forces you to not be able to see every bit of information in the same way. So you sort of do have to rely on your own artistic practices to sort of work your way through images, and then as a result of that, that can sort of end up giving you that stylistic choice that you might be sort of after within work, because you're not just copying images, you're sort of leaning on your ability to design images and sort of work within that area to create something more than just the image that you're seeing. Whether or not it works for everybody, I don't know. I'm really curious to see if people have a similar reaction with it. In general, it's something that I do very much try to bring up with my students when we're painting, because the amount of people that I see painting from printouts, and they'll do a master study or sort of use a printout for a reference image, it blows my mind, because immediately you're so limited to the amount of information that that printer can reproduce. So unless you're using a very, very high end printer that has a very, very high gamma for or Dmax value for painting dark blacks, your images aren't going to be sort of able to give you the right sort of value in shadows. And then that's just going to create a real sort of disconnect with what you can actually, or what, how you understand that image to be, and then also what you're able to see from that image. So it's definitely a really interesting scenario to sort of be investigating how you are sort of using references and responding to references, but then also trying out sort of different references or different ways of viewing references at least. Yeah, I've never liked painting with paper references, Luca. Like, it's always been the case that so much is lost within printing out images. It's different if you are painting. Yeah, it's different if you're painting from a photo, and that photo is like a proper analog photo, and it has all of the information that analog photography gets. Um, it is one of the things that, like, a lot of artists did that for a long time, and sort of as a result of that, there's a lot of different abilities to be able to use that quite successfully. But it's definitely sort of a lot of information is lost when you are printing something from just like a home printer. um hi Neil, it's glad to see you, very glad to see you. And yes, hopefully hopefully little G will settle down um wonderfully, so you can come and join the chat. um I was printing my references at first. Yeah, and the colors will definitely be so sort of dull compared to your phone. But it's really interesting because with when you sort of are painting from your phone as well, I sort of have come to this conclusion that generally most paintings are going to be viewed on a phone. And as a result, sort of, we are doing ourselves a disservice if we don't include um sort of, or at least examine how photos or how paintings of our photos and or how our paintings in general will look on phone screens, because that's the most common way that people see them. It's also sort of, I think, quite a big argument for painting on or sort of, certainly for myself, just having sort of consistency with the products that I use. And that's very, very easy to do with Apple, but I know that that means that my phone and my screen for recording is going to be sort of calibrated at least to each other, so I'm able to have some consistency when I'm sort of deciding if I need to make any adjustments. Hello, Angel. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. It's been a long time since we tried it, but yeah, fantastic. Painting on Polaroids, super fun. Painting on Polaroids, sort of really, I sort of had a lot of fun actually physically painting on Polaroids, which was really fun. Again, sort of you having to reduce all of this information down onto this tiny surface, and then sort of use abstraction in a way to make the image clear. Just a very exciting sort of exercise to be doing. Also, incredibly glossy surface really forces you to sort of control your paint mixing, and sort of an exercise that is worth trying. Again, sort of every exercise or every sort of experience is just going to give you a larger idea of how paint is manipulated, and sort of how you can sort of get the effects that you need to get when you're trying to get said effect. So painting on Polaroids definitely sort of forces you to engage with just a completely different surface, where it is so slippy, essentially. Um, Now, sort of getting into talking about what I'm doing at the moment, um, because otherwise I will just chat. It's very much the case in lessons that I will chat and talk until I am asked a question, and then I will talk about that. But sort of, if you do have any questions, please do ask. I will sort of otherwise just be mumbling to myself about the painting. Um, just trying to establish some sort of basic shapes for this part of the painting. It's quite an interesting reference of myself, sort of looking slightly down. It's not looking down enough to sort of create a very clear manner of the sort of tilt of the head, but it's enough that I'm sort of think it's a different sort of level of what I'm doing. Hopefully, it should start looking like me at some point. At some point, being unspecified amount of time, though, it could be several hours from now, but we'll see. What do you think about having such a focus on the quality and fidelity of a reference picture? I think having the information there sort of allows you to choose what information you're really interesting or is really interesting to you and that you're sort of being drawn to. And it takes a really long time to sort of establish what is interesting to you as an artist. But I do think sort of having all that information at the beginning is helpful for you to sort of be deciding that. I'm constantly saying in life drawing that when you've got short poses and you sort of don't know when that pose will sort of work its way around again, you really do have to just sort of understand what is interesting to you and sort of what might be sort of a focus for you to just sort of spend a bit more time on. A lot of a lot of cases at the moment, I'm seeing quite a lot of hands being the focus of people's sort of interest in life drawing. So they'll be spending most of the session sort of looking at how they can sort of focus on the hands, or at least incorporate the hands in a sort of more important manner. It doesn't always have to be that the hands are the focal point of the image, but at least being brought into the conversation, and that's really interesting. But it sort of it sort of requires you to have that access of information. You sort of need to be able to see everything and then delineate what you are needing to be working on, or sort of what is interesting to you. So it with that choice is being made for you, by having sort of no reference, or sort of a lack of information in your references, then you're not able to sort of respond in that way. You're just sort of, again, in the same way that if you're painting hyper realistically, you're sort of just copying the image. If you're painting from sort of low fidelity work, and you're sort of abstracting, you're still doing the same sort of thing. You're just replicating the image. Whereas at least if you have the information there to begin with, you can start to make those decisions and sort of be deciding what is of interest. Hello, Nicole. Lovely to see you. That's fantastic. Glad you could come. Just drawing my mug. But I definitely do sort of feel it's important to sort of try to engage with references in as many ways as you can, just because you don't understand, you won't understand what a certain type of reference is doing for you and sort of how it's changing your work until you either remove that reference or sort of completely change the scenario in which it's made. So we do have to sort of put ourselves into these scenarios and like, okay, how does this work? why is this working for me? How can I sort of allow this to work for me in the future if I need to? Now, I definitely do sort of alongside that like the manner in which the photo is small on your phone. Um, Even in the way that if you are then zooming in for detail, um, it sort of remains quite simple. It remains quite small, and sort of it doesn't have the entire focus to be considered. Um, Definitely an interesting sort of manner of isolating information in order to sort of engage with things independently. So you maybe not trying to engage with the entire image all at once. I think I'm pretty much getting there with this initial drawing. I generally spend as little time as possible on this initial drawing because drawing and painting are different things, and this is a painting. So yes, I do want to sort of have some form of understanding of how I'm going to be moving around the image, but I also sort of want to be getting into the aspects of paint as quickly as possible because that is where most of my decision making is going to be. That is where the sort of crux of this painting will be decided if it's successful or not. It's all in the application of paint, and sort of the understanding of observation of what you're seeing within responding within paint rather than sort of the initial drawing. My very crazy wild hair when this photo was taken, which definitely makes definitely it makes me more interested in painting self-portraits, because it is just so fun to sort of draw this absolute sort of like mess of grey hair. The palette is titanium white, Indian yellow, permanent orange, phthalocyan or phthalocyan, turquoise, and intense pink. A palette that I've sort of been working my way through over the last 2 months, sort of quote unquote dubbing it the Golunski palette, because it's stupid and I like it. But I sort of am trying to work with it quite a lot at the moment. A lot of the paintings that I've been working on privately recently have been made in this palette, and I am just constantly surprised at how far the palette will go. I sort of keep putting it in different painting scenarios to try and test it out, and it just continually is wowing me with the amount of range it has. So it's definitely very interesting as a palette. Yeah, if only I knew a lawyer, Nicole, to help me trademark it. If only. I wonder. I mean, I definitely can't think of anybody. Especially no one called Nicole in the chat. But yeah, it was interesting because I sort of had this question recently, and we were sort of talking about ideas and sort of impact, I guess, on the sort of paint world. I definitely sort of have come to the conclusion recently that the rest of my life is just going to be trying to add to the conversation that is painting. I sort of hope that at some point I'm sort of in the position in which I can start to really just add to that conversation. I think that would be a very lovely sort of way for me to spend my life. That being said, sort of a big part of that is sort of facilitated an interest in how artists sort of allowed themselves to sort of put themselves in those sorts of scenarios. And that's sort of why I started reading about the Impressionists and things recently, and sort of in a more private manner of how they were engaging with certain aspects of sort of community. But anyway, that is a completely different question, a completely different conversation for a completely different day. So things semi-established. I definitely am working on the idea of books. Anything that I would do sort of book wise would be mostly sort of established in a manner of trying to showcase what you're looking at, why you're looking at it, and sort of how it can be interpreted in terms of different aspects. The sort of first part of that is an interest within color, an interest specifically within light, and sort of trying to understand a bunch of different aspects of light and sort of how we are responding to them, how societally you sort of engage with different elements of light. And that's been a lot of thoughts, for sure. It's a lot to sort of be considering, but I'd love to sort of work my way round to something like that, sort of talking about aspects of global illumination and subsurface scattering and reflected light and incidental light and halation and all of these different elements of light that sort of we have been forced to try and come to terms with and try to understand, in terms of other media, generally sort of like CGI work, and sort of how that understanding can help you sort of create a greater aspect or greater feel of paint, like light in painting. But you can't just sort of throw out the terms without sort of explaining them in a way that is both practical, theoretical, and applicable to sort of I'm rooting for the idea. I sort of hope so, at some point, but we'll see. We'll definitely see. Drinking coffee at almost 7 p.m. Definitely a bad idea, but I want to see if we can sort of get into see how far we can get through the painting. So one of the really interesting things, I guess, that I'll sort of be discussing it throughout the painting. One of the really interesting elements of this palette is you sort of look at it and you're engaging with it, and it's like, oh, there are no dark colors in it. It is a very bright, very vivid palette. As soon as you take the permanent orange and mix it with the phthalocylene turquoise, you get this wild, very, very dark purple. It's like alchemy. It's unbelievable. I sort of, every time I do it, I never expect it to get that sort of low in its value, but it does, and it's really, really interesting. I sort of really wasn't expecting that within that manner. Gorilla, I Dali and AI up. I definitely can talk about AI art. Whether or not I'm the person that should be having that conversation is a completely different manner. But I, as everything, am very excited to sort of see its applications. I also sort of hope that it might get people into sort of creative prospects. I don't think that painting is going to be going away, nor sort of the way that people are creating images. Um, but it sort of is a technology that will only be further developed, only sort of come become more intelligent and more sort of interesting to sort of foresee how that will change. But there is something so inherently uh, pure about individual response, and sort of that is something that AI hasn't been able to sort of mimic yet. Whether or not it will be able to do that at some point, I don't know. Um, for the AI sentient robots that are watching this in the future, um, hi, I like you. Please don't take over the world. Um, but in sort of regards to the impact on art, I think it will, as most things do, as everything do, it will sort of be impactful to uh, painting at an earlier stage, in a similar way that sort of NFTs were. Um, but then, sort of once it gets understood, sort of what it's able to do, it will move to a more niche market again, very similar sort of manner that NFTs did, and it will still be used. It will still be popular, but it just will be sort of its own subsection. At least at the moment, um, we'll sort of have to see how far that technology does come in the sort of next few years. But we can um, sort of keep an eye on it, I guess. I definitely sort of am very interested about the applications that artists will be able to use it for in aiding them to create work. And I think that that's sort of the more interesting sort of manner to be focusing on. Um, but sort of again, I that requires sort of an understanding of the application, and not only the application, but I guess the mechanics. Um, and I don't think we're at that sort of stage yet. Um, so we're sort of just able to sort of fumble our way through a lot of the AI stuff, but it still requires like the human hand in manipulating it. Um, but clearly mixing. Yeah, so that you definitely would expect the sort of value. I guess it's because we're sort of so ingrained into uh, having a connection between value and chroma, that we sort of see this very, very chromatic paint and expect it to be sort of mid in its value, whereas in reality they are both quite low in their values for the amount of chroma that they are. So when they mix together, they sort of uh, counteract those contrasting chromas and then neutralize into a very, very dark purple. Um, what's really interesting is that you just have this then very wide range of purples to sort of manipulate, and that goes all the way from very, very cool purples to very, very warm purples. Um, and then that's without sort of introducing the palette of, or sort of the orange of the palette, or the intense pink of the purple of the palette. The intense pink um, definitely doesn't get tons of use. Uh, when it is used, it is sort of very important that it's used at that point. It is incredibly weak as a pigment. Its tinting strength is very, very low, so you end up having to use quite a bit of it. But it definitely has a really lovely property of sort of capturing reflected light. Uh, and what's quite interesting is that you can use those aspects of not only painting reflected light in sort of cool manner, but also in a warm manner, sort of depending on what you're mixing it with. So it has a huge wheelhouse of what you can reach with the intense pink. Let's grab that down and bring that down. And I sort of only want to start to at least contextualize the portrait with some of the decisions that need to be made around the face, just so that when I come to making decisions for the face, I have something to relay it against. I'm not just going in blind. I'm not just trying to make random guesses, or not random guesses, but at least educated guesses against the stark white of the surface. So I definitely do just want to start to establish some sort of value structure in the painting. The shirt is quite helpful for that because it is a very big portion of the image, so it dominates a lot of the aspects of the color in this part of the painting, at least. So definitely curious as to making the shirt sort of read somewhat clearly at this stage. At the moment, I'm just sort of using just the 3 from the Procreal range. I've sort of been talking about these brushes quite a lot to my friends in the art chats. Just really good, versatile brushes that I'm finding are sort of working as workhorses for a lot of my paintings. So at the moment, I'm just using a 3, and I'll sort of use that for at least the first layer, I think, and sort of getting that established, and then I'll move onwards onto both bigger and smaller brushes. But at the moment, this is sort of fine, usable, adequate. But yes, so this is a self-portrait, which hopefully at this point we sort of established. I feel conflicted about flat brushes. Recently, I have majoritively used flat brushes for most of my sort of painting career, and I found them to be exactly what I've needed in a lot of scenarios. As of late, I have been painting with filbert brushes, and again, the filbert brush, I am finding it's all just about how you use the brushes. So you can get flat brushes to sort of have the properties of filberts, and you can have filberts to have the properties of flat brushes if you manipulate them in specific manners. I generally am always interested in sort of using the thing that is most versatile, the thing that has like the most access to it. And certainly recently, I've just found the filberts to just sort of fulfill the needs that I have within painting and sort of mark painting. I can manage them in a wide enough range that I can get a very full selection, or for a very full range of marks, and that's sort of all that matters, really. So I occasionally will sort of use flats. I hardly ever use rounds. Rounds are probably the least used type of brush, and I occasionally will use like rigger brushes to sort of get those fine lines. But again, more often than not, I'll just use something that's versatile enough to do most of the painting with. Let's knock this back a bit and sort of also create this complex shadow shape of the crease here. Bring that down. To be honest though, I feel that brush choice is less so about a specific type of brush and more about a familiarity with brushes. So it doesn't really matter if you are using flats or using rounds or using filberts like these, if as long as you know sort of how to manipulate the brush in order to get the mark that you're after, you can go very far with sort of your weapon of choice within paintings. Working on reflections of shadows is like the thing at the moment. That's like the thing that I am really trying to see, really trying to notice, and sort of trying to understand, I guess, in most scenarios, so I can at least try to capture it well enough. The thing that I sort of established quite early on when I did have this realization that I was really interested in that specific aspect of light was to get aspects of light working correctly, you need to have everything working correctly. You need the form to be working correctly. You need the sort of like surface quality to be working correctly. And a lot of that makes a lot of sense when you have the light being correct. So the sort of correct lighting will tell you a lot about the shape of an object that you can't see the full shape of. It will also sort of tell you quite a lot about the properties of that object, whether or not it's reflective or absorbing light, or if light is semi-passing through it in a sort of subsurface scattering sort of manner. It is unbelievably complex, sort of when I try to think about it. But it also is giving me a lot to chew on in paintings at the moment. Like, it's really... Oh, did I lag there? I feel like I lagged there. I should be okay. But yeah, definitely sort of a lot of interest in trying to just chew through all of this information and trying to sort of really establish what I'm looking at and sort of how I'm trying to describe it. But again, it's sort of allowing me to live in paintings a bit longer, sort of really focus on different aspects of paintings and sort of try to figure out how to describe these elements in different manners. Right. What's next? I'm gonna throw in this cool grey background, and then we will work on my face meat. That's good for the shadow in the corner here. That comes across. Now, it's quite interesting as well. I definitely do find myself speaking to myself painting. Just, it's almost like I'm trying to explain to myself exactly what I'm working on, or sort of what section that I'm working on. If I'm not doing it aloud, I'll just be doing it sort of in my mind. But I am constantly trying to sort of fully understand the aspect that I am currently working on in a manner sort of like beyond just observing it. I'm sort of trying to be able to verbally explain it. It is not always easy, but I think since I started doing it, it has had a noticeable effect on sort of the quality of my work. Because I am very much trying to understand how things are read, or at least how things are being seen. So it forces you to translate that, I guess, in a different manner. Right. So I've used, am using, will use, will continue to use just the tiniest amount of Zestit in my painting. I definitely sort of try to limit how much Zestit I am using. Partly because I want the paint to sort of have the consistency of paint, and using Zestit definitely sort of can reduce some of the more painterly qualities. It can also interact with its own painterly qualities, but for the sake of this painting, I am quite happy to sort of use it a bit less, a little bit more sparingly, I guess. How is the stream? Is it sort of clear? Am I dropping frames or anything, or lagging out? Not that I know how to fix that, but it's something I can look forward to in the future and sort of work on that in the future. Oh, well, thank you very much, Roxy. I sort of am intending to use Mondays as streaming day now, because essentially this term on Mondays I have been teaching online, and I am now no longer teaching online on Mondays. I'm just teaching on person at the moment. So I thought I would utilize the day of not having to teach in the evening, or not teaching in the evening, and just utilize that time to start streaming. So hopefully every Monday at this time I will sort of be here to keep you all company as I do some painting, and generally just chat. I like chatting a lot. I like sort of responding to artistic questions quite a lot. So sort of excited to try and work around in that manner, but we will sort of see how it goes as well. I definitely am very, very curious as well. Whilst doing it with Arube last week, there was definitely some sort of like audio technicalities to be figuring out with introducing someone else to the live stream. I would very, very much like to figure that out, so I can sort of invite my very, very talented and lovely friends on to paint with me, essentially, and just have that as a avenue to start chatting. Yeah, I thought so. Very quickly, Chris, these surfaces are the Bell Art surfaces. They're like gesso board on modular wood or something. Um, but yeah, sort of the Bell Art Services. I will link it in my story afterwards, so that if you want to have a look at that. See, yeah, I definitely did think about Twitch. Partly because I have a lot of ideas at the moment, and as anyone will sort of explain, having lots of ideas and having lots of wants to sort of work in the artistic fields and sort of create projects in that space um, requires a lot of money. So I definitely did think about Twitch for that manner, because Twitch is incredibly supportive if you are in that space, but it's also not very accessible. Sort of the way that I sort of ended up concluding on that thought was that the people who use Twitch can definitely find their way over to YouTube. The people who generally use YouTube can't necessarily navigate through Twitch. So it just seemed, all in all, like YouTube was the more accessible of the platforms. And at first and foremost, the most important element of the work is that it is accessible, is that anyone can watch it, and sort of it's not paywalled or anything. Because yeah, don't want that. Definitely don't want that. Sort of talks about it quite a lot at this point, but I spent a lot of time as a teenager sort of wanting good art content, and just not being able to get access to it, because especially when I was it definitely seems to have changed a bit now. And you like, it's like Wendelin Hugelmuth, who released his one of his demonstrations on, I think, Vimeo, for like £5. You definitely do see more instances of artists sort of releasing instructional videos for very, very low prices. When I was younger, like, all of the instructional artistic videos on YouTube or sort of around that space were mega. Like, you're talking at like £200 per video for like 40-minute videos, in which it's not always that helpful. Now we have streams, we have YouTube, we have TikTok, we have Instagram. We have a really great way of getting quality information out from sort of like independent people from a lower price point. So you don't need to buy really expensive cameras and all of this. So as a result, you can sort of keep things quite accessible and quite cheap to be made. But it definitely was a question. But yeah, sort of the accessibility definitely was the main point in which I decided to use YouTube. I think you could do both YouTube and Twitch. I think you'd just be sort of, at that point, putting a lot of stress on the OBS program in which I'm using to sort of do this, and then also bandwidth and things like that. I've originally really wanted to stream in 4K, but my camera overheats. The bandwidth really sort of struggles. It struggles enough when it's just like 1080 at a good frame rate. So sort of going to 4K was definitely like, oh, what are you doing to me? My PC felt very, very sad at that point. Right. So now let's paint my face. Let's paint my mush. So again, sort of using very reductive palette. Take this out of the equation for now, because won't be needing these in the same manner. I prefer to just have a bit more space to mix. So let me just continue. And then again, just take off that residue. Clean palette, clean brushes, sort of all help in order to sort of make your color mixing what you want it to do. Like, it's not then being affected by outside effects that you don't want it to be. Sort of 4K is overvalued. What's really interesting with the 4K aspect is that it means if this is in 4K, then I can take this section and just have this section and it still be in 4K. Whereas if I'm sort of, it still be in very high quality. If I'm sort of trying to zoom in on a manner of this, or sort of later want to edit aspect of this in the video and sort of zoom in, it means that I can't, because zooming in on 1080, people just don't accept that quality anymore. It becomes too blurry. With 4K though, I can sort of zoom in on specific moments and be like, hey, look at this, and it still be high enough fidelity in order to sort of capture it nicely. So let's paint. I'm sort of using a 5 shadow method for this, I guess. Sort of looking for my shapes mainly, and then sort of will work within that. It was the same manner in which I drew this portrait. It's the same manner in which I'm going to paint this portrait. I have a feeling that it's sort of referred to as like the 5 shadow method. I've only ever heard it referred to that manner. And I think I heard of it being referred to in that manner by David Kazan. But whether or not it has a different name, I do not know. Essentially, I will be looking for the 5 biggest shadows in this sort of section. Mostly in the faces, it's your eyes, which count as individual shadows. The space underneath your nose, your filtrum, the shadow cast by your top lip onto your bottom lip, and then the shadow cast by your bottom lip onto your chin. Very easy shapes to be moving around. Sort of really basic shapes to move around, and essentially what that allows is these shapes to sort of be moved into the correct space and then figured out. So if I am feeling that my eyes aren't lining up in the way that I want to, I can still move this very, very simple big shape without having to do tons of redrawing, and then move it to where I need it to be, and then reestablish it, and then work from there. I guess it sort of falls into a quality of like mass value drawing, when you're just sort of looking for the biggest values, the biggest shapes, and then working within those. But it's sort of a bit separate from that. Close, but sort of not exactly the same. As always, I sort of am endeavoring to try and get everything covered before I sort of start to make any sort of not important decisions, but sort of decisions that I feel that will stay in the painting until the end. Before I get to that choice, everything needs to have some sort of contextualization. I am not going to be making great color choice mixing if I am trying to mix against the white of the surface. So I do need to actually establish something across the entire board, get all of this white paint, all of this white surface off, so it is no longer sort of in the equation. And then at that point, I will then start to make more refined decisions. At least that is the hope. But it could always go wrong. It could always go terribly. So we will see. Chris, whilst you're there, very, very sorry about yesterday. Really wasn't expecting to not be able to come into work yesterday. Very, very stressful train journey in which someone was taken ill on the train, and then all trains were unable to move to London. So I was trapped in Three Bridges. But yes, I am glad they at least got the message to the students before the second part of the session started. And I hope that the life drawing went well regardless of my presence. But yes, not something I am willing or wanting to repeat. But it does happen. Such are the joys of commuting. Now, once I start to have this entire surface covered, I then want to sort of try and move my way back through the quality and within that sort of reevaluate everything, reevaluate all the decisions that I have made now that they have a greater contextual understanding around them. It's not just sort of a point of decision making where I'm like, yep, that's done. Everything sort of is subject to being re-established. Everything can and will be moved if it needs to be. I definitely sort of feel this is feeling okay at the moment. I just am unsure about different qualities. Sometimes the drawing will be correct, but you need to sort of model the paint on top in order to sort of get the painting actually reading correctly. So there's lots of different elements in which they constantly need to be sort of questioned to whether or not it's working. Let's try and mix up something for my hair. It's definitely grey with orange, so let's start off there. Yeah, that sort of works enough. Let's thin that. One of the helpful things of having an absolute mess of a hairstyle is obviously artistically a mess. It's not. It's a mess on purpose, and not just because I don't do anything with it. Sort of just allows a lot of really fun mark making to be had within the sort of shape design. Definitely something that I've noticed to be a more personally more sort of interesting aspect of drawing self-portrait was this change of hair. Maybe if you are struggling with self-portraits, what you really need to do is just have crazy hair and then paint that. No, yep, Alex, I hope that dinner date goes very well and is as interesting. Um, and hopefully I will see you on one of the other streams soon. But yes, glad that you could make it. Um, thanks. Yeah, like again, sort of this color palette has yet to sort of fail me, I guess, in any image that I've decided to uh pick. Everything sort of that I felt like, oh, I won't be able to mix this because there's too many greens or there's too many blues. I don't have that higher sort of fidelity over mixing these blues. Everything's been wrong. Like everything has been proven wrong. So everything just sort of like, oh no, wait, yeah, I can get to this. I just need to manipulate it in this manner. And I know that you can sort of do that with a lot of palettes, and sort of it's something that I am really curious about exploring. But sort of to have such a range with so small, so few colors has been very, very different for me in terms of my painting. So I definitely am curious to sort of continue pushing this palette until it sort of fails me, and sort of seeing where that element is. Maybe it won't. Maybe this palette can sort of handle everything, or sort of handle everything well enough to sort of keep it as a whole palette. Maybe one of the colors gets swapped out at some point and that extends its range. I don't really know. All I do know at the moment is that I'm having so much fun sort of using this palette to try and capture everything. Self-portrait with flamey hair sounds amazing. So definitely very interested to see that. Now let's just knock this in. I know it's not right, but it's more right than it was. And then bring that across, sort of defining that face shape a bit. I've always found self-portraits a very interesting aspect. I was very, very against them until I wasn't. I spent a lot of my sort of early painting career really sort of lamenting having to paint a self-portrait. It's not something that I wanted to engage with. The moment in which I started to change how I saw them definitely helped me use that time sort of more willingly, I guess, more willingly do self-portraits. And that was that it was just complete open canvas for anything to happen. I could experiment in any way and it wouldn't matter because they weren't going anywhere, they weren't to be shown anywhere. I just sort of could experiment and sort of try whatever, and it either worked or it didn't. And I was able to sort of maintain that I sort of really try to maintain that manner of engaging with anything self-portrait wise, so I can always just sort of expect something unexpected, I guess, or sort of less regimented to come out. And that sort of that's been how I've engaged with portraits, and sort of how I am choosing to engage with portraits. I fully understand the want to sort of not be painting self-portraits, but I definitely do think it's a very interesting space to experiment. And as a result, sort of some of my self-portraits have been some of my sort of favorite paintings that I've done. The painting that's going on exhibition in sort of 10 days in London is a self-portrait, and that's my favorite painting that I've ever done. So sort of there is, I've always noticed a sort of personal response to self-portraits that have been like, actually no, this was really important for me to do. This has sort of allowed me to thank you very much for coming, Roxy. Yeah, this will be sort of saved automatically, I guess, I hope. And yeah, hopefully it will be here for you to watch. But yeah, I sort of do really want to always have that mindset, I guess, with self-portraits. It's definitely not something that comes without sort of work and trying to facilitate that, but I've had a lot of like positive feedback from having that freedom of exploration in self-portraits, so it makes a lot of sense to sort of continue that, both from myself and sort of the way that people have responded to particular paintings that are self-portraits, and as a result, I think I've got a lot, maybe 15 self-portraits at this point. So now, if anyone does have any questions, please do ask. Otherwise I will just talk. Just starting to sort of block out some of the dark parts of the hair. Let's make that a bit more shapely, because at the moment it's just sort of a blob on my head. Now, keeping things blobby is very helpful, in the same way that sometimes defining things is also as helpful. So let's just define that a bit. I really want to push this shape as well now that I've just seen it. So whilst I'm here and have that thought in my mind, I want to make sure that the ear, which is above the eyebrow, has that correct sticky outiness of it. That's the technical term of it. But I also want to reintroduce that element just here, where I can just see the background coming before the hair consumes all. Let's bring the hair down, get that sort of feeling a bit messy. And let's pump up that chroma as well. Let's just, again, we sort of understand that ears have a very transparent element to them. In a lot of lighting scenarios, you can see light passing through the ears, making them very, very warm, because essentially as the light passes through the ear, it's collecting all of this light or reflected light from bouncing off all of the capillaries and vessels and veins in the ear, and just creating an intensely warm moment. And as a result, you can really push how chromatic the ear is and still have it read quite believably, and that is generally a lot of fun, to sort of see how far you can push that warmth in a painting, or sort of just how warm it can be with it still reading correctly. I also very much consider myself like a holistic painter, um, in the terms that I am working on the entire image as a whole and sort of jumping in between different sections of the painting. But I'm always sort of taking various stages of the painting to sort of fruition, rather than just working on one section until that section is done, and then moving on. As holistic, like Dirk Gently, exactly. You're seeing everything all at once. Um, Holistic painting is sort of similar sort of idea, that you're just taking in all aspects of the painting, sort of all moments at once, instead of focusing on specific details. Love this cool purple light here that's reflecting off the hair, and then let's up that orange warmth to capture the similar sort of manner here. And let's pump up that yellow quality, because my hair is more yellow than I'd like it to be. Whoop. Sound effects are obviously definitely required whilst painting. Otherwise, how would people know that you're making the correct mark, the mark that needs to be created? Let's really drag this in front as well. So I guess part of the engagement with wanting to paint on YouTube and stream like this is definitely one of trying to explain why I'm doing things, I guess. It has been something that's been very helpful in order for myself to figure out how to improve. And as a result, I sort of am hoping that it might be a useful resource as well. But it's also part of the just wanting to sort of share thoughts about painting, I guess. So I might sort of do various talks, or sort of various subjects, as I progress through navigating this new space of streaming. And we will see how that goes. But yeah, if you have anything that you particularly want to discuss, or sort of are interested in discussing, do let me know. And I'm sure I can rattle off something about something. And if not, then I will rattle it off the next day or the next stream. Yeah, I sort of, the issue with that becomes is that when you sort of try to, as far as I understand, and as far as I understand through what Arube was explaining to me last week, when you are using OBS, which is the Zoom, or which is the platform in which you can capture elements of your screen and then broadcast them, you have to control the inputs by a virtual sort of input hub, in the same way that if you were actually sort of physically doing it. You would have input lines in, input lines out, and they would all sort of have different effects. You need to sort of manage that within a virtual space within Zoom, and then sort of get that reading all the things correctly. So one of the issues that we had last week was that although Arube could hear me through the Zoom call, OBS wasn't picking my input up as a individual microphone, so it wasn't picking it up. And then you've got the issues of like sound degradation. So this mic is the same sort of mic that I was using anyway last week, and sort of as it's getting compressed through one element and then digitized and then compressed again and digitized again, you get a real drop off in like sound quality. It's definitely tryable. It's just I also foresee some issues within that. But yeah, definitely tryable. It would be very, very handy just to sort of have a Zoom call in which you could have whoever speaking and it be captured in a way. And there must be sort of other that like I feel like that is a thing that I see sort of YouTubers do and podcasters do and stuff. So it must be doable. I just also understand that it's probably not very easy. But I'm sure that someone will figure it out and we can party. At the moment, I sort of feel like that's the most. I'm definitely just trying to get the sort of, rather than fully defining the hair at this point, I just want to try and capture the sort of proper width of it, so it feels like it's actually wide enough and tall enough to give this idea that you're looking slightly down on the top of my head, and as a result you can sort of see part of the my crown, I guess, the crown of my hair. But I think that's sort of starting to be described, but I'm also wondering if I need to describe more of the face in order to make that a bit clearer. Also it's a bit too chunky at the moment. I feel like it's a bit too, and don't get me wrong, it definitely is very anime-ish, but it feels too anime-ish at the moment, too sort of chunky. So let's try and bring down some of that definition. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking a lot about that. How the eyebrows are so important in trying to capture that effect. Specifically, sort of how close the eyebrows are to the eyes to just really give that idea of foreshortening in this space. I just want to define the mustache ever so slightly more. It should be fine for now. And then let's just block in this sort of shape for the beard, and bring it up so it doesn't look like I've got a neck beard. Bring that soul patchy bit down, put them up there. fuzz here, fuzz, and up here, fuzz. Blurred that sort of cheekbone because it is being blurred because of the fact that the edge is hair. Bring that down. Yeah, I think that's sort of working. Drink my 90-minute-old cold coffee. And so at the moment, all of this painting has been done with this number 3 Procreal brush from Jackson's. In between sort of color mixing, all I'm doing is grabbing it, grabbing a bit of kitchen towel, and then just squeezing out as much paint as I can before going into remixing. So everything has been done with this one brush. I think sort of at this point I will continue to do everything with one brush. So this is sort of an unexpected one brush painting. Sometimes it do be like that, but let's bring that down. How am I gonna handle the neck and jaw? I think from what I have sort of seen / observed so far in sort of this image, one of the most important elements of trying to capture this jaw in this specific painting correctly is to capture the correct sort of feel of how the shirt is hanging here, and sort of creating this space in between the neck and my apple, between the neckline of the shirt and my Adam's apple, and then how here, where on the side of my neck, how the shirt is sort of closer to it and sort of touching it. I feel like if I am able to explain that feel correctly, that will give me the correct idea, or sort of portray the right or idea that it's transitioning from the neck into the shirt. Firstly, one of the first things to sort of change is how cold my neck is. So I definitely need to really bring down the warmth here. Again, I can tell you, for I was there, that this photo was taken in my bedroom, which has grey walls. I'm also wearing a black and white t-shirt, which will sort of create quite a lot of cool reflected lights in that space. I think I took the photo quite a while ago as well. I think that it was just from the overhead light, which means that it would be very cold. Very warm in the lighting. But because all my walls are grey, it's just really cooling down this aspect here. So hopefully, if I can navigate that area complexly enough, I will be able to describe the neck transition. Again, very, very cold, much colder than sort of first anticipated. Bringing that across, it's softened the jaw, because my jaw definitely isn't that chiseled. Definitely more round quality to it. I also need to bring this shirt up because at the moment the beard sort of went too far down. Let's bring that shirt back up. Okay, getting somewhere with the neck. Bring that down, describing the edge there of the Adam's apple. This is light, but not that. This is in shadow, but sort of also getting reflected light from the light passing through the t-shirt up into it. So let's try and capture that. Yeah. I definitely don't have quite that defined a jaw, so definitely need to remove that a bit. Not it's just more about the roundness more than anything else, sort of trying to get that correct roundness of my face. It's really interesting at this point because I have, as mentioned earlier, sort of completed 20 or 15 self-portraits, whatever the number is at the moment. I am very, very aware of my own face, and sort of can understand what I'm seeing quite quickly when it comes to it. So I'm not having to sort of question as much what sort of aspect I'm sort of observing. So like when it comes to my nose, I know the wonk of my nose. I know sort of the particular offset to sort of capture it like my nose. And that's really helpful, especially in this sort of lighting, in this sort of scenario where I'm painting like this. It allows me to lean on my understanding of the image to sort of accurately portray parts of it. Lighten that up. Bring this cool light in across the eyebrow. I have a very scary red eye there at the moment, but it is what it is. It's not, so I can quite clearly see most of this eye socket on my right hand eye. Let's bring that up. Yeah, that instantly makes it feel a bit more like my face for some reason. And now I'm definitely at a point in which I am able to make more complex, sorry, let me say that without stopping every sentence. I'm definitely at a stage now where I can make more complex judgments from what I'm seeing. There is enough of this image sort of in situ that I can start to relate a bit more and sort of start to get that higher level of precision with what I am starting to see or sort of starting to want to capture. I think that this is very important at the moment, just to give myself that top lip. Sorry, like my philtrum showing underneath my mustache just a tiny bit. And my mustache or my beard in this photo is quite green. That's very dark. Let's bring that down. No, it's the state with most sort of features, Luca. I'll sort of try to establish the space around the features to try and get them feeling um like the structure is all there, the structure of the face is there, without the features sort of playing too much of a part at that point. um and then if I do that successfully, then I can have very little information in the eyes, as to sort of again allow it to be painterly, sort of allow it to be descriptive without being described. um in terms of artists that do that well, I think Alex Wilby is one of the sort of best people that I can sort of see do that. He has a very, very good eye for design choices and how those design choices sort of allow something to be read. Um, Part of that as well is because he has spent so long sort of working through design choices in his sort of practice. Seeing Wilby's studio and sort of just going into his sort of upstairs studio, um, it's just a treasure trove of drawings everywhere. A lot of them when he would have been at work, sort of just doodling, and it's so cool to see. There's just so much work, and it explores so much, like sort of why things are working and why things aren't working. um and as a result, sort of again, Wilby's both paintings and drawings have a very good um aspect of design choices in them. So it's nice to see that sort of thought in person, and see all the paintings in which he was establishing that thought. um it's getting somewhere. So let's bring in. Yeah, he really is a sort of uh just a fantastic artist. I'm very glad to sort of have come across him uh through the Kanyo chats, because he really is a great draftsman, great sort of wonk as well. But he doesn't sort of, sometimes he does. He's not too concerned about sort of posting things on social media, so um it's definitely aspects in which sort of you don't see a lot of the things that he is doing all of the time. um so it is nice to sort of understand that there are lots of artists also like that, who are not sort of wanting to showcase their work in that sort of manner. But that doesn't sort of detract from the quality of the work that they are doing. Let me see if I can capture that sort of brow here, and how that, let's really warm up this crook here. Let's see how extreme can I get away with this? I can. I think even just the edge of that being just so slightly lighter. And then what else? What do I need? What's the most pressing to deal with? Definitely want to quieten that down. And let's similar idea but darker over here with that bounce of reflected light in the hood of my eyelid. And let's bring down that now that I've established that. Right. Lip. Is mostly just the bottom lip that I can see. Can't really see the top lip. Sort of thin at this angle. So everything is relying on that bottom lip to define the lips. So let's try and capture that correctly. Give the feel that it is warm. That's definitely one of the beginnings of shortfalls in this palette, is the lack of sort of the, I guess, obvious red. Less so in this painting. Definitely in the Mood for Love painting that I completed last week, where the dress had yellow and red poppies on it, or sort of red poppies with yellow design elements on it, and having those poppies and trying to define them without a red, I did find very difficult. But I could sort of come to the choice of it just by, or sort of like the reading of it correctly by sort of cooling down the other areas to sort of make that element feel very red. But it took a lot of fiddling with, for sure. Bring up that. And then the beard is more on my face. Very clean edge. Here, let me clean that up. Here. Bit more. And then I can come back on top ever so slightly, disrupting that edge. Right, nose. Let's have a look at the nose. Firstly, let's highlight that a bit. Bring that same color into the cheek. There. Now, noses are definitely really fun to paint, partly through this idea that I've sort of come across in lots of image choice recently, is how clear you can make them that they're on top of something, how obvious you can make it that the nose is in front and create that edge. And it's an edge which you can control and sort of start to manipulate throughout the painting. So if you have one element of the painting that sort of is allowing you to read that edge correctly, then suddenly every edge feels like it's being handled in the same way. So if you can make it very, very clear, that you are understanding your edges by sort of capturing the edge of the nose, then suddenly the rest of the face is also read under the same understanding that the artist had that same level of understanding of edge throughout the entire painting. And all it takes is sort of one well placed mark in the nose to sort of have it read that, yep, this edge is in front or this edge is behind. It's something that I found very interesting when sort of engaging more with clothes in my paintings, that clothes are so easily defined in trying to give them that crisp edge of sort of surfaces and textures meeting, that it can really add that level of quality, like three-dimensional quality to your work. And sort of if you can have moments in which people are reading that and sort of understanding that very, very clearly within your painting, then it sort of allows the parts in which maybe it's less clear to be read with a sort of similar understanding. So it's like, okay, yes, the painter knew how to handle this edge, thus I will assume that he also understood how to handle the other edges in the face. It's definitely an aspect, not an aspect that you should rely on, but it is a way in which paintings are read. So it is a way that paintings need to be considered. But yeah, as a result of that, I found it very, very fun, very, very interesting recently to just be including clothes in a lot of my self-portraits, a lot of my pet portraits, sort of just to zoom out a bit so it's less just face, but also face and clothes, and generally hands as well. And hopefully it sort of starts to make a collective body of work that feels like that. Now, let's definitely need to bring the beard up onto the face a bit more. Not masses, but just a bit more. Let's add a bit of chroma to this edge where the beard catches the light, and then redefine that shape here. Yeah, it's definitely really interesting because obviously within faces they are very, very sort of round generally and sort of very soft with their edge. And it just means that if there are one or two moments in which you can very, very clearly define that it's like, yes, I understand that this image is very round, but there are also elements in which it has sharpness, then you can start to play off that. Because if everything is round in the image, then nothing is round because it's all been handled with the same sort of manner. But if in that same sort of understanding, if you have something that is round and is sort of offset by something that is sharp, then suddenly there's tension, there's a dialogue, there's sort of something to relate that to and judge it against, and that can make it feel a lot more round, a lot more hard, a lot more jagged, whatever you need it to be. So it is definitely a very interesting manner to sort of to be considering. In the same way, one of the first conversations I remember having with Milo was about this idea that if in a painting everything is flat, then everything is reading as flat. If everything is textured, then nothing is textured because it's all done within the same sort of style, so it doesn't stick out. It's not like you're deciding or sort of making the decision to make things feel textured. So if you have moments of sort of rest, moments of like things which are less textured alongside moments which are more textured, and sort of play with those values, then you can sort of increase the amount of how something is reading. I definitely have done a few paintings that are sort of non-figure based, and they're fine. Like I don't mind doing them. At the moment, I think that my practice is definitely sort of more engaged with trying to capture a sort of physical element of people, and that's very different from the sort of past work that I've done. Again, whether or not it's successful at this point, I don't really know. I'm sort of curious as to see how the next body of my work is sort of received, I guess. I think at the moment I'm sort of on track to be releasing a lot of stuff from this point on, as I sort of continue to focus a bit more on painting videos and sort of that ideas. But yeah, I feel like these paintings that I'm doing at the moment are very far removed from my previous work, just because of my sort of level of observation, and sort of what I'm engaging with in the paintings, and sort of how that has changed my physical painting practice. Yeah, within this body of work, I've got some big paintings. The biggest that I can film, and it's important that all of the paintings in this body of work are filmed together because they're all sort of meant to be part of one piece. The biggest that I can go is 120 by 90, which is, I found, a big enough sort of space for me to paint. It doesn't need to necessarily be any bigger than that, for the works that I am doing. At some point in the future, if given the opportunity to paint a 10-meter by 3-meter canvas like Sana did, if that was presented, I would 100% go for it and do something big and crazy. But at the moment, I'm still coming to grasps with not only painting at sort of a larger size, but also sort of filming work at that size. My practice sort of mostly remains the same when painting bigger. There are bits of design choices. One of the main things that does change is when I paint big, I like to have my palette flat, and I like to have my palette flat so I can make big wet piles of paint with lots of terps in them, sort of, that allow you to move across the surface very quickly. Just because I'm painting big doesn't mean that I want to sort of then be slowed down by sort of the labor of trying to fill big areas of paint, or sort of big areas of the painting with paint. So sort of definitely prefer having the palette lying down. I also prefer, or sort of will increase um, the brushes that I use. I don't go crazy brushes wise. I sort of might sort of tend to use brushes this big. Um, it sort of depends on the area uh, that I'm trying to fill and sort of what stage of the painting I'm in. At the earlier stages of painting, I'm more likely to use bigger brushes, and then as you work through, the brushes sort of might sort of come down in size. I never try to work too small within my brush work because I just don't like the look. Um, and it's like this painting. I think this painting um, is big enough, and sort of I'm not looking for the level of detail in which a brush smaller than this would be sort of allow me to get. So this sort of brush is fine for this painting. In terms of surface, um, I have experimented quite a lot with various things. I particularly liked and sort of do like painting on moleskin paper. I like the dryness of it, but I also like the smooth quality of it. I like smooth surfaces. Um, and obviously, moleskins only go up to A3. I have asked Moleskin if they do anything bigger, which they do not, and I'm very sad about it. In terms of other painting or other paper, it's fine, and sort of has its each unique property. There is definitely an element of painting on paper when you get too big that the surface becomes very, very fragile, and that is worth noting, um, depending on what you want to be doing with the paintings. And as ultimately this set of painting I would like to exhibit, um, I sort of do need to be concerned about their structural integrity. Cost sort of also becomes a bigger factor within large paintings. Now, the surface that I'm painting on now, the Bell Art sort of gesso board, um, at this size, which is 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters. I think it's about £5. Um, the largest size that they do is 70 by 100, and that becomes £56, I think, which is definitely a lot of money to be spending on a surface if you're not like selling the work. Um, so that's definitely a factor. Quite often I will make my own surfaces, um, in which I just use 2 coats of gesso. I apply the gesso in a smooth as possible manner, and then I will sand it down wearing a mask, um, because painting and sanding paint is very toxic. So I try to wear a mask when I'm doing that. Um, yeah, I really liked the Strathmore 400 um, paper, and I think it was the 4-ply paper that I used to like, the smooth Stratford paper. It is quite difficult to get hold of in the UK, um, and that has been the case for many years now. Um, I started using the Strathmore Bristol paper in, I want to say, like 2015 or 2016, um, partly because that's the paper that so like an artist was using at the time and was really interested in mimicking his sort of charcoal techniques. Um, so I sort of got onto it at that point. I think one of the only places that you can get it in the UK is a website called Artist Papers. Um, uh, and yet you could buy individual imperial sheets. So you're looking at, like, I think that's 65 centimeters by 50 centimeters um, of the 4-ply, which is very, very thick. It's more like a cardboard thickness. Um, and that was sort of the perfect surface for me to work on. I have bought rolls of Strathmore paper and tried to cut it. Um, unless you have a dedicated space to cut paper that big, it is incredibly fiddly. Um, sort of that is the constant reminder that I always forget when I try to. It's like, no, it's fine. I've got rulers and stuff. I can, like, big cutting mats. I can buy a massive roll of paper and then cut it myself. And doing that without sort of marking the paper is so difficult. Sort of to keep the paper not blemished at that stage is more hassle than it's worth, I think. So I sort of started to just buy paper. So no, like the moleskin paper won't warp with oil paint. Now I am almost certain that the aspect, so acrylic paper warps acrylic paint warps paper when you're painting on it, because of the cellulose in paper being affected by water. Because oil paint doesn't have any water in it, it doesn't affect the cellulose in the same way. So as a result, sort of the paper doesn't go buckled or start to get that wavy aspect to it. That's, as far as I understand it, the case. It can sort of, it's not like the paper warps, but it's also the paper will get affected by the oil paint. And it sort of depends on how much you're concerned about that. If you really are concerned about that and you want to have your painting sort of last, then you can try sort of really smooth surfaces like Yupo paper, or like Jackson's used to sell a super fine oil primed linen, which was really fun to paint on. Very, very slick surface to sort of just, I don't know, drag and push paint around on. Really not for everybody. I've sort of tried to introduce friends to that paper before, and it's sorry, those panels before, and it's very, very hit and miss. Some people really like it, some people really hate it. But it is always a sort of personal preference within a lot of elements of that. But yeah, it's Yupo is definitely very interesting. I haven't painted on Yupo for quite a while. I'll definitely get back to it at some point. It's just that the work that I'm doing at the moment doesn't need to be on that type of surface. And the moleskin paper seems to be sort of adequate for a lot of the sort of things that I'm trying to do. A lot of the paintings that I'm doing sort of in preparation for a solo show, if I am able to get a solo show, it is using panels. So that is sort of, again, using a specific surface for a specific sort of look or feel, so that when it hopefully comes to the point of hanging and presenting the the work's all on sort of fairly substantial panels that are not fiddly and not too um sort of likely to get damaged. Um, for a lot of the paintings like this, where it doesn't really matter if I ruin this painting, like although this is on a panel, I sort of was very much contemplating if I was going to do it on paper earlier, and just sort of ended up on panel just because I thought it'd be easier for this initial one. In terms of like surfaces like that, I get wood cut from a website in the UK called like woodsheets.com or something, and they just cut MDF to size and to specific thickness, and then it keeps the edges really really clean, and then I will prime them with gesso, and that's just using like a Jackson's gesso. In terms of storing paintings, most paintings, if they're under a certain size of mine, I will put into like cellophane art bags, and put them into boxes that I built out of Corex, which is just like Corex is essentially a double corrugated cardboard but made out of plastic, so it's quite strong, quite light, and then it's like weather resistant. And yeah, I just you buy that in sheets of 4 by 8 foot, and then I was just building boxes out of it essentially. I think that's like 4 mils. Other than that, sort of like I've brought laptops and like kept the boxes from laptops and then just stored paintings in those boxes because they're quite sturdy, things like that. And I'll just have all the paintings on paper in individual like individual bags that just all go in one box, and it means that when people come to my studio, I have like 400 paintings to show them in all of these boxes. Maybe I'll do a video about that. Maybe one Monday stream, I will just set up the camera upstairs in my office, and just go through all of the boxes of paintings that I have. Maybe that is one way to spend a Monday night streaming, because I definitely have thought about that in the past, but not really had a platform to do it. Whereas now, with YouTube, and within framing, I will essentially keep the paintings in boxes, in bags, until they sell. If they sell, I will then generally glue the paper to the board, or to a board, and then send that out, to sort of protect the painting during shipping, but then also to make it easier to frame. I understand that sort of framing is very difficult for lots of people. Not everyone sort of knows where to go or sort of who to potentially ask. That's also why I try to add the option to frame a lot of my work as I sell it, because it's definitely not for money, because I earn like nothing on the frames that I make. It's like done at cost, but it's sort of a bit more. It's not done at cost. I earn a little bit of money. I definitely don't earn anywhere near the amount that it takes time wise, but again, it sort of protects the paintings a little bit, makes them ready to present, and sort of removes that hassle of framing. But it is very, very time consuming. And yeah, I will just keep them uh in their bags until they sell, if they sell, and then I'll put them in uh boards, put them on boards, and then frame them, or put them on boards and ship them, or just if people want the paintings just sort of as on the piece of paper, then I also will just ship them like that. But sort of it's nice to have the option. In regards to gluing paintings onto panels after they have been painted, it is not an easy thing. I do it uh sort of 50-50, I guess, where it goes wrong. um my self portrait, in which I had to glue to a panel and send off to a show, I had to glue that after it had been painted, and um once it had been glued, the glue dried in sort of a bubbly manner. Um, so I then sort of had to try and fix that a bit. It wasn't too much of an issue. I don't think, unless you're specifically looking for it, which now obviously everybody is. If anyone goes and sees that painting, I don't think you would necessarily see it. But definitely really stressful, definitely very difficult, and worth sort of yeah, it. I sort of figured out a few different techniques. The issue that I feel it is with gluing paper paintings to panels is that generally when you glue something to panels, um the surface that you're gluing, the paper, is allowed to stretch when it gets wet. That is the case for like half of the paper, um, with an oil painting, because half of it is allowed to stretch, um, the sort of back area where you're applying glue. Um, the front area with the oil paint isn't able to stretch. So you have to be quite careful with that. Um, I have glued paintings very successfully um, in the past, but it's not consistent. Like there are some paintings which have glued much better, um, and that's to do with the size of the painting that you're trying to glue, how thick the paint is, um, sort of how hot it is. If the weather outside is really hot and the glue is drying really quickly, then that sort of affects it. So it's one of the elements in which uh, you have to do your own sort of research, I think, in those areas in order to understand how you can do it best. And that doesn't mean that you can't sort of take guidance from places, but yeah, I think it's so uh, variable in the scenarios in which that can work or not work that it sort of requires your own uh, investigation through that sort of space. Yeah, like putting a lot of weight into it. We used to have a fly wheel press, like one of the printing presses that you can sort has the big um twisting sort of clamp at it, so you can clamp a lot of weight down. Um, that helps. Um, Sort of, I found spreading the glue with a hard surface like a scraper or a credit card sort of allowed you to get a thinner scrape of like more consistent glue across the entire surface, rather than it sort of being bubbled up in certain areas. um no, I don't varnish any of my paintings. I used to varnish paintings um back when I first started painting. um I had some unfortunate accidents with varnish in which paintings were ruined, um, and sort of the nature of varnish sort of makes them a bit unrepairable. Um, Again, not impossible. At the point in which they were damaged, though, I definitely didn't have the time to sort of restore them. Within that as well, um, I started to sort of I suppose like just research oil paint a bit more and sort of look into the historical elements of oil paint. Um, Anyone who knows me sort of knows that I'm big into the Impressionists. Started reading a lot about how the Impressionists weren't varnishing their paintings. Um, Started to question why people varnish their paintings, and lots of it is because they want the paintings to sort of last. They want colors to be sort of brought back out, yada yada yada. And it just came to the conclusion that for personally, for me, I really like the raw quality of oil paint, um, and regardless of how it's done, uh, and whether or not you use matte varnish or gloss varnish or spray varnish or apply uh, varnish with a sponge or a brush or a roller, whatever way I sort of um, investigated it, everything came out with sort of a reduction of the texture, um, and sort of a skewing of the colors. Now, I really particularly love the mateness of oil paint, and sort of the dry effect that you can get with it. And yeah, varnishing seems very, very counterintuitive to that. So as a result, I sort of stopped engaging with trying to varnish my work years ago. Um, if someone brought a painting and they particularly wanted it varnished, I would prefer. It's like, well, if that's the case, then like you can varnish it, type thing. I'm not selling them with the intent that they are varnished because it's not part of how I see the paintings. Um, so I don't necessarily want to be doing that, modifying them in that way. If it is very important for you that you have them varnished, then that is something that you can do. But it's also sort of, yeah, if that goes wrong, then that goes wrong. And that's not necessarily my thing because I wasn't intending them to be varnished. So let's extend that shadow when I'm here. I think we're getting close. Definitely not too far off, at least. I am going to do something to the eyes. I will sort of see how that comes out. I also want to just put a little bit more of an understanding of what's happening in this t-shirt, which means light, bringing up that value so you can see that crease, and then there's another crease here, which I also need to lighten up this value in order for that to be reading correctly, he says, hopefully. Obviously it understands, I understand exactly what I'm doing because I'm doing it. Whether or not anybody else understands what I'm doing is something completely different. Let's bring that down like that, something like that. That looks enough like a crease. Is there anything I need to balance out this side of the image as well now? Right, there's let's establish a sort of shadow shape there. Let's go for that. And then let's bring that back up on the inside with some calls. Is that Luke? I do see, Mr. Hutchings. Right. And let's now. I think the wisest thing to do is to, once I'm finished with this, which isn't yet, you'll have to bear with me and put up with my company for a bit longer. I think it makes sense to sort of do as Arube does. Very, very fortunate that Arube has play tested a lot of this sort of YouTube painting in the past. Definitely very helpful to have that resource of information kicking about. I think after I'm finished, I will take a photo of this and then put it up on my website. That seems like a sensible thing. It is Luke Hutchins. Fantastic. I have found my way to streaming on YouTube, as you can see, Luke, instead of Twitch. Again, most of that is down to accessibility of YouTube, how everyone can sort of get hold of YouTube quite easily. Whereas at Netflix, Twitch is it's a different space on the internet. I do have as well a royalty-free music account on Epidemic, so I can theoretically have music playing on in the background. If that is advisable, if that's something that people feel is needed. Obviously quite quiet, so it doesn't have I don't have to sort of argue with it over speaking, but man, I would love to just be able to play the music that I think is relevant to sort of hear as I'm painting this, because it adds to context to who I am, why I'm painting, why I'm making the decisions that I am making within the painting. However, although it's free advertising, record companies don't like that, so I will not be doing that. But again, I can sort of introduce music next time if that is what people would like. Again, sort of the fidelity, the sort of control that I feel this palette has is absurd. Like, I highly recommend testing it out if you're at a loss for trying to experiment within a sort of different palette. And sort of seeing what that forces you to create in terms of like shortcuts or understanding of, okay, I can't hit this, I can't reach this color, how else can I sort of navigate around this? It is a scenario in which we only get better through putting ourselves through that. And sometimes I do really appreciate the fact it's like, yep, okay, this is going to be a challenge. This is not going to be easy. These colors aren't colors that I'm used to. But sort of in the sense that painting is a string of problem solving, it can lead you down like areas that you never thought would sort of come up, and that is definitely very exciting. But I'm also really curious as to see how people who maybe are a bit newer to painting and don't have the same sort of understanding of color mixing, how they'd navigate through a palette like this, because it's not obvious, but it feels very intuitive to me. I obviously am not able to get into the scenario in which it doesn't feel intuitive, because it's sort of like my palette, if that makes sense. So I don't really understand how it would be interacted with by sort of like someone earlier in their career. If you are sort of interested in trying it, please do let me know. And I can give you a bit more information on the palette. And that can just be like a DM through Insta or something. But yeah, I sort of would really be excited to see how other artists sort of do handle this as a palette. Let's bring now very, very carefully trying to decide how much information I bring in to the eye. Definitely, I'm not going to bring in much information, but with a reduction of information, it requires my shape design to be very, very clear. So if I am going to have sort of less information in the eyes, I need it to be the right sort of less information, sort of less information in detail, but the shape design still being very clear. Otherwise, it's not readable. And if it's not readable, then it's harder for people to interact with. What's quite interesting is here is how I've sort of started to rub away some of the paint, and it's starting to show some of the line work from earlier. Quite a nice effect around the eye. Let's see if I can get away with a very blue grey highlight here, because there is the sort of beginnings of some sort of highlight there. And let's just redefine that shadow that's been created. I'll tell you exactly what I've just seen and what I want to do. I want to make sure that this edge here for the nose is a bit punchier, a bit more painterly, in order for it to read a bit further. There we go, like that. It's same sort of very, very specific, I think, drag of the brush to get around that sort of angled aspect of the nose there, but to really cut into that shadow to make that shadow very, very fine. I'm gonna go like this. Oh, it's very bright. But I like it. And then let's see if I can keep this eye described in a similar amount of detail as the other eye. Oh, it's soft. Let's try and bring that back up. Tear duct shape. That. Now, let's bring that across. And then let's re-establish this eye. This bottom eyelid. Let's bring that, drag that in front. And then lessen the value, drag that up. Bloop. Now, quite a very, very distinctive shape in this eyelid slash hood. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it's this shape and this interaction with this shape going up into the eyebrow that sort of makes it, that sells the effect that it's sort of looking down ever so slightly. Subtle poses, I guess, subtle like variations of things like this obviously require very, very subtle moments in order to sort of capture them correctly. Then sort of brings it around. I think I need to increase the warmth as well in this, as I then just re-establish that value pattern across there. Bringing that down because it's not that bright. It's brighter, but not that bright. Bring it down, down. And then now something light and green. Green being relatively green compared to other aspects of the image. To bring that in front. And then as this all ends, and how it darkens as it goes up into the temple here. Let's create that sort of value. By Jove, I think we've done it. I think the painting is almost there. How fantastic. Glorious, even. As always, sort of, there's things that I could fiddle with. There are lots of things that I sort of could fiddle with for very, very long amounts of time. I'm definitely fiddling with a lot of paintings at the moment, because I'm just having fun with playing with the details a bit. So part of the interest of painting on YouTube and sort of painting in this sort of space was the fact to sort of try and reintroduce that brevity into some paintings, not every painting, but just have some paintings in which I had to resolve them in one session and sort of call it quits, because it's important to me, I think, to have that distinction of paintings which are laboured over and paintings which are sort of really, really considered, and paintings which are just sort of, you paint for the time that you are painting on them, and once that time is over, that painting is done. Sort of different spaces to be engaging with painting in. And again, as I say, I think both are very important to my personal practice. So definitely wanted to try and reintroduce some one session paintings. Right, now that that's sort of better described, yep, I think that's fine. I think that's sort of mostly, I'll tell you what, it's not quite there, only because I just need to sort of make the hair make a bit more sense. Very close, very, very close, but yeah, definitely need to describe that hair a bit more. Bring in that undervalue as well for this, for the hair on the eyes, or the eyebrows, as normal people call them, not the hair on your eyes. Establish that lighting scenario of that capturing that light. Similar sort of thing. Nice chromatically grey highlight there, and then a nice green highlight there, and then something very, very, very red. Lovely, lovely jubbly. How are we feeling? We feeling that this is close? It definitely feels close. Bring down that highlight episode. Let's give my cowlick the proper cowlickiness that it deserves, for it is a mighty cowlick. Few shapes. See, for all of that white paint that I started off with at the beginning, very, very small amount of it is left, which doesn't surprise me, but sort of, yeah. White paint is a fantastic thing to be using in a palette. A lot of paintings cannot be done without white paint. It is very important to understand how to control white paint. Again, lest it become potentially milky or pastely, but you can still do very chromatic works in with using white paint. Let's bring in just one or two indications of the shadows that the hair is casting. Let's keep it all in the same color spectrum, even though it's not in the picture, but it just makes it a bit clearer as to what these marks are sort of jutting from my forehead. Okay. So that's done, I think. All done with one brush, done with my reduced palette. I'll sort of be posting this on a picture of this on Insta, I think, and on my website in like, I don't know, 20 minutes. We're just coming up to 3 hours on the stream, so thank you for those who have been there the entire time. And yeah, I think it's okay. So yes, this is hopefully going to be a recurring thing. So next Monday, same time, 6 o'clock ish, 10 past ish, 6, I'll be streaming again. And yeah, hopefully in the sort of not too distant future, we can try and figure out a bit of OBS fiddling, so I can have friends coming and join this sort of space. But thank you very much for coming. I'm glad you've enjoyed it, and I will catch you next Monday. Bye.